Recording.
Recording in progress.
So welcome everyone and thank you for attending today. I am Fatih Aranolo and I am a member of the Mining Department Seminar Committee. The committee organizes the seminar series and invites speakers to come and address students, faculty, and interested industry professionals on a variety of mining-related topics. Since we are today hybrid, Zoom and in person, I would like to request that everyone online keep their microphones muted during the presentation unless they want to ask a question. For people who are online, you can ask questions during the presentation as well. So it is an interactive session. Just a reminder to everyone, we'll be recording this session, so you will be able to view it on the department YouTube channel after the seminar has concluded. Today, I would like to welcome Professor Ian Lange. Thank you so much for speaking today. Professor Ian Lange is the Director of Mineral and Energy Economics Program at Mines. He is also the former Senior Economist at the Council of Economic Advisors. Professor Ian Lange will be talking to us today about mining policy from an insider perspective. This is an interesting topic. Without further ado, please welcome Professor Ian.
Thank you. Yeah, we're excited to be here. Let me share the screen and I'll get my slides up. Hopefully that works well for the folk on Zoom. Essentially, I thought it would be fun to either share some stories or answer some questions about, what's life like, we'll say, in the White House. Although my wife always gives me a hard time because we were in the building next door to the White House. We weren't in the White House. But what are the conversations that were going on related specifically to mining? But if you want me to tell some other stories about COVID-19 or something like that, I'm sure we can. Just to be clear for folk, I guess we'll say my firsthand experience at the Council of Economic Advisors was December 2019 to April 2021. So I had about a year of Trump, we'll say 2 months when nobody cared, and then the first 100 days of Biden. So my goal here is to share a little bit what I learned, answer some questions. I'm hoping this can be more of a conversation rather than a lecture. So I'll keep my eye on the Zoom chat function, or if you speak up, I'm sure I'll be able to hear that. And again, I have some stories that I think are helpful or useful guiding. But anyways, if you have any specific questions or you want to talk about a specific issue, or to pontificate about what the Biden administration might be thinking, I'm happy to do that. Or engage in those conversations. And the only thing I guess I should, to be fair, right? I never went to the Oval Office with that meeting with the president to be like, this is the important thing to do, right? And I was always hoping for that time that I'd be at home, because of course they give you a cell phone and a computer, right? That I'd be in my apartment and my cell phone would ring at 2 in the morning, it'd be the White House. And I'd be like, oh, I have to go in 2 in the morning, yeah, right? And the day that oil price went from 60 to 20, I was like, please call, this is the perfect time. But of course they never did. So anyways, I have some stories, but some of these stories are secondhand, like my boss, or the people that I interacted with were in the Oval Office or something like that, not me personally, but then they said, hey, this is what's going on, or this is what we were thinking of. So I'm going to relay some of those things that I heard, you might say secondhand. So, okay, just to give you a little context. So the Council of Economic Advisors is a little bit of an odd duck within the White House. So statutorily, the council's role is to be, we'll say, objective or to provide sort of economic advice around policy issues. Now, look, it's the White House. Nobody's objective, right? You can try to tell people, no, this is pointless. But again, it's the White House, right? It's political. You can't be stupid, right? People just stop listening to you if you just start, President Trump administration, and I would say, the Democrats have some really good ideas, right? They'd be like, get out of here, right? Don't listen to that guy, and vice versa. right? So you have to, you can try to be objective, try to be rigorous, but you're within the context of politics, right? You can't ignore that. So the main folk within the White House who are making, the policy process or policy decision-making are the National Economic Council and the National Security Council. The general split has been that the National Economic Council has domestic issues and the National Security Council has international issues. They sometimes overlap, obviously, right? Sometimes economic issues are domestic and international, or specific economic issues are, and sometimes national security issues, right, can be domestic or domestic focused, but that's still going to be the National Security Council. But anyways, this CEA, or the Council of Economic Advisors, is a relatively small group. I think at our max we were like 20, and that included, like the politically appointed people, the staff like me, and then we call them juniors. Seniors were people with a PhD, juniors were people without a PhD, and juniors, I'll say, did more of the grunt work. Seniors, yeah, hey, go do this, right? Kind of thing. It was a little bit like that. But we're tasked with statutorily, and we're seen within the White House as rigorous data and analysis. Statistics is this magic thing to politicos that we could wield to them. But that also means they could, we were not that important that they could just ignore us if they wanted to. And I will say, generally on large things, we were ignored. On small things, you could make a difference, right? So the most common job for somebody, I would say, who's trying to be objective in the White House, actually, I should have also mentioned, I forgot to write on here, and this is, to be frank, a little bit of my experience. There is something called the Office of Science and Technology Policy that is supposed to be, I don't think they're supposed to be CEAs like doppelganger on the natural science side, but they also exist. To be frank, they did very little when I was there. We sort of never discussed them or talked about what was going on with them. There are a couple of things that they tried to lead that we interacted with, but we mostly did not interact with them. We interacted with the Economic Council and the Security Council. So the Office of Science and Technology Policy does exist. Like I said, they were sort of not doing much when I was there. Right, so if you've met a Politico, right, okay, like one-track minds kind of thing, right? So they'll have a very narrow view of what's important, what's good, what's economic activity that matters. It's the ones that matter for their, constituents that they think are going to get them to vote for them. And so what you often have to do is sort of clarify for them trade-offs. Yes, you can help the natural gas industry, but you're probably going to hurt the coal industry, right? Because they're substitutes in burning in electricity generation. So by all means, help natural gas, but then don't be like, hey, we're also great for coal, because they're substitutes. It's not going to happen, right? So you would generally try to reveal or quantify or at least discuss, like, hey, man, here's the trade-offs. And I know it's unrelated to mining, but still definitely like one of my favorite stories is in October 2020, right? There's a whole bunch of executive orders in October 2020 because Trump's trying to get reelected. And generally, in my experience, executive orders are meaningless. They don't do anything. But anyways, they decided to sign into the Trillion Trees Initiative. We're going to plant 1 trillion trees. So this gets sent around, and anybody thoughts on, we're going to join this 1 trillion trees initiative? I sort of said, well, right, we're the Council of Economic Advisors. We're supposed to think about economic issues. Like, private landowners who are growing trees are not going to like that. Now the government's competing with them for inputs, trees and dirt and whatever else you need, and the government's competing with them in outputs, timber, 30 years from now. And so that got kind of ignored. I brought it up again, sort of like after the executive order was signed, and I was basically told, yeah, we're not planting any trees. We're just not going to cut them down. I was like, what the hell is this executive order, right? Like, there's trillion initiative to plant 1 trillion trees, and then, like, yeah, we're not planting any trees. And basically, right, they didn't have any, there's no money allocated, right, because Congress has the purse strings. And again, this is a big part of what I've learned in the executive branch. Not a lot you can do about some large issues because, right, Congress has the purse strings, right? And so you just have to deal with what you can. But anyways, anyone in the federal government, everyone in the White House generally understands, right? Kind of like cost benefit analysis, numbers and dollars. Hey, we're going to get $5 for a buck we spend or something like that. And so we would often try to help in and like, let's try to quantify these numbers. Let's make sure it's 5 to 1 or something like that. And let's tell a good story, right? And so this was a lot of times, basically like what I did, right? Sit in my office till I get a call, till I get an email and be like, okay, we're going to talk about NEPA reform. We're going to talk about battery minerals. We're going to talk about the withhold and release order for polysilicon, right? Like, all right, like, let's get ready to start, thinking and talking about those things. So for some examples, and again, maybe this will just try to either wet people's whistle or help give you, if you thought of something or you remember something you want to ask what was going on, I'm happy to tell you what was going on at the time. So you may be aware that in June, the Biden administration implemented what's called the withhold and release order for polysilicon produced in the Xinjiang area of China. That's where the Uyghurs are, right? And there's this general belief, I'm certainly not, I don't know what the word is, versed enough to say like it's effect versus not effects or whatever. I don't want to get into that, but right. So human rights abuses against the Uyghurs. Most of the polysilicon refineries are in Xinjiang, where the Uyghurs are being mistreated. Earlier in the Trump administration, there was a lot of discussion of putting what's called the withhold and release order. It was kind of this new tool the executive branch had found. Instead of taxes or tariffs, basically it would put the onus on the supplier. It would basically say anything that's coming into the country from this area, the Customs Bureau can just take until you can prove it, until the supplier can prove it's not used, it doesn't have products that were, used or grown or whatever the word is, produced with potential human rights violations in Xinjiang. So in December, it was tomatoes and cotton. And then they said, hey, Ian, let's talk about polysilicon, right? So polysilicon is one of the largest inputs into solar panels. Xinjiang area of China has, I think, like 4 of the top 10 polysilicon refineries. So I said, okay, yeah, well, I'll write, basically you're always asked to write a memo, right? So you would basically have, a memo is 3 paragraphs, maybe? You got maybe 3 paragraphs to say, 3 paragraphs at most, right? To say, this is the issue, this is what I think, this is what seems like a good idea, right? And maybe here's a little more, right? Now, but you can't go further than that, right? Because then people stop reading, throw it out. I learned a little bit also about management and leadership, because at one point our chairman, so I would send a memo off to the chairman because we thought it would be done. And within like half a second, I'd get oh, that's awesome, thanks. And the first couple times it was like, yeah, he said, awesome. And then I was like, wait a second. The email was a half second after I sent mine. There's no way he opened it, read it, thought it was good, and wrote it. So then after a while, it was like, who cares if he says it's great, right? Because he didn't even read it, right? Like, so if you're ever a manager and someone sends you something, make sure there's enough time that you might actually be able to read it and write back, because otherwise people figure that out. So we all, in the end, we all just didn't care whenever our chairman essentially wrote something back, because again, it was always like within a half second of sending him something. Wouldn't care is a strong word, but you never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So anyways, nothing really ended up happening in the Trump administration around polysilicon restrictions, even though you might have thought they were less enamored of solar panels. I think at that point, that was like December or early January, the White House was checked out, right? Nobody was doing anything. So then Biden administration comes in and they ask for a memo. If you don't know, basically, because of the Presidential Records Act, basically, I had to turn in my laptop at the end of the Trump administration, and they, and I didn't have that anymore. They got a new laptop for everything that Biden did. So they're like, hey, can you write that memo again? I was like, I guess, but I can't, I can't go copy and paste it, right? I got to go write it again. And so, we try to figure out what are some, in this scenario, right, we're thinking about, it was similar to the Biden administration, in the Trump administration to the Biden administration, US jobs is always a good story. right? And so it turns out that there's I think it was the Hemlock company has a polysilicon refinery in Michigan that they had mothballed in March 2020, right? So perfect story. If we put this withhold and release order on polysilicon from China, right? We've got this mothballed facility in the US, in Michigan, no less, which is a purple state. So we'll help with politics. If we get jobs back going there, and sort of wrote about also potential issues, can the US solar panel producers sort of ramp up production, things like that? How might that restrict other policy goals? But in the end, after I had left, right, so the Biden administration did implement this withhold and release order on polysilicon from Xinjiang. Right, and so, yeah, I'm not really sure why the Trump administration, like I said, sort of stopped. So if you're not aware, there was a gentleman named Peter Navarro who had a very powerful shop in the Trump White House called Office of Manufacturing and Trade Policy, and he was sort of virulently anti-China. So he would have loved to do something like this, but I don't know. He was too busy refuting the election in order to push this through push this to the end. But there's nobody that I saw that was kind of in the way of this withhold and release order for polysilicon. So everybody seemed to be like, yeah, it seems like a good idea, right? It's something where US and Germany and our other allies have some production facilities. And so we're not going to hurt ourselves too much by restricting imports from China. Some of you are probably intimately familiar with this issue. So this was a very popular issue. And I must say, from my own, we'll say personal politics, something within the Trump administration I could get behind. Couldn't obviously get behind everything, but that's not, they don't care what your personal opinion is, right? You're there to give advice. But it was easy to write things about the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, right? So in January of 2020, the Trump administration proposes changes to NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. Basically, any project that touches or that has a federal nexus on federal lands using federal money, when I say crossing streams, something like that, right, needs a NEPA permit. They're sort of notoriously long. They've killed a ton of mining projects throughout the US. Companies have also gone bankrupt as they wait for their NEPA permit and have no idea whether they're going to get them and things like that. So I was super excited, right? January 2020, Trump administration is interested in tackling NEPA. I have all these stories from people who are, friends and probably friends of some of yours about how NEPA is really hurting the domestic mining industry, and that we could have, a more secure and resilient supply chain in the US for many of these products we're interested in, if only NEPA could get out of the way, right? And so, we wrote a ton of memos. We mostly focused on the presumptive time limits part of the reform that the Trump administration was putting forward. So there was a number of things in there, and NEPA is just a big web of lawyery stuff, and we're not lawyers. We were economists, right? But this presumptive time limit to go from, say, a 6 years to get the permit to 2 years to get the permit, how much more valuable is that? And I was all excited to be like, all right, let's go show the mining impact. And it's like, geez, mining investments are small. Like, if the number's not in the billions, nobody cares. So I was trying to write memos about oh, look at this project in Wyoming that would have generated 40 million in revenues. Construction, okay, construction, there we go. Construction, like 10 million or $10 billion you lost every year or something like that, pick a project. So I will say generally, I ran into this wall a lot where it was sort of like, oh yeah, tell a mining story. Yeah, good. Those numbers are too small. No one's gonna care. These numbers are just not big enough that anyone is gonna go, oh yeah, wow, that's a story, right? And so we just moved on to other things. I will say the other, or another example, I guess, of too small numbers is the Trump administration passed something called the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which reduced the corporate income tax rate. In the summer of 2020, we still had to go to the office. The Trump administration was requiring most people to go in the office, even though about 2/3 of them ignored that. I was still going in. And there was really nothing to do, right? The administration's in full campaign mode. Most of what they're asking us for is BS, like, how great have our policy's been. And so I'm just there like, what can I do? And I figured out, sort of the change in electricity prices as a result of this reduction in the corporate income tax rate. And I end up, calculating this, and I'm like, oh, geez, electricity prices have fallen. I can get into the details, but anyways. And we're saving probably something like 100 million a month. Sum that up over the last 24 months, right? That's whatever, something like 240 million. And people are just like, so who cares about 240 million? I'm like, it's 20 million a month. Yeah, who cares? So again, like you got to get either big numbers or some huge political constituency. I will say the other time, one of the only times I went into the West Wing was to meet with a gentleman who was excited about space stuff, and they heard that I was the economist for the Space Resource Program. So I sit down, and it's like good old boys network. People are like, "Yo, Bob, you're kind of silly," and stuff like that. So then he comes to me, and goes, "Ian, what do you think of people mind?" And I was like, okay, should I say I like it or I don't like it, right? This is a Republican. And of course, he quickly was like, yeah, I hate it because it splits the Republican Party, right? I get my Orvis Sportsman magazine and it says anti-people mind, right? And other Republicans are for people mind. So again, that was a kind of an eye-opening experience, I guess. I was damned if I did or damned if I didn't, whether I say I liked it or not. But things like that, right? That was a problem for the White House because it split the party, right? Not for any other reason in some sense than that, right? If the whole party was on one side, they're, sort of like the White House is good with it. If it split the party, well, then you got problems, right? Because you're going to get parts of the party that are unhappy with it. So the other thing, this was, I would say, one of my, I don't want to say favorite days, one of my, but this was a pretty fun day. So again, somebody that we all probably know, I'm guessing, wrote to this mining company and said, hey, there's this guy from mines in the White House. You should write to him. So I get this email that's like, Ian, this company wants to see the White House to talk about their permits. And I was like, look, man, that's not what CEA does, right? Like, that's not us, but I'll pass it up the chain. So I passed it to the chief of staff. They're like, yeah, National Economic Council does that. Send it up to there. So I did. And a couple weeks later, I get this email from the National Economic Council person who has to listen to these pleas for permits. They're like, hey, you want to come to it? Like, that person that you suggested talk to us is coming into the office. You want to be there? And I was like, that sounds cool, right? Like, I don't know, how does this work, right? Right. So I go to the meeting room, and it's on one side of the chair, it's me and this gentleman at National Economic Council who's going to see like 15 or 10 of these meetings probably like a week, right? And then in comes the mining company, and then in comes the president of the National Mining Association, right? And then, so, oh, this is interesting, right? Let's, I want to sit like a fly on the wall, right? I want to listen to what's going on here. Oh my God, like, I know, to be fair, this is like the theory you're told is you do the ask at the end, but what a freaking waste of 30 minutes, like 15 minutes of like, our state really loves Trump. Our company loves Trump. Trump is great. We like Trump. Can you talk about Trump? And then it's like, and now let me tell you about this project. Like, it's got this long history. And once, like somebody came by and smiled at it. And I'm just like, oh God, is there, like, what are we doing here, right? And as like the NEC guy is like, hey, enough people are coming, they're like, yeah, our NEPA permit, we're having a hard time getting it, and then they're being shoved out the door. And I'm like, how is that worthwhile, right? Like, these people flew in for that meeting? Like, seriously, is this how it goes? So I don't know. Again, the political theory is you put your ask at the end. So I was not quite surprised that they put their ask at the end, but presumably not where you're being pushed out the door. And presumably not when that person is going to go to like the next meeting and have somebody else, I don't know, do 15 minutes of how much they love Trump and stuff like that. And you're like, at the end of the day, like, I barely remembered what they wanted. And I only went to one of those meetings, right? So it was really weird. I'm not really, I mean, some part of politics, right, is probably something above my head or I don't understand. But this was the weirdest, this was by far one of the weirdest things or one of the weirdest experiences, just sort of not talking about what was going on, what was needed. To be fair, what could this person have done, right? So I guess this person could have gotten the phone with a political appointee over at Forest Service or I can't remember if it was Forest Service or the other one, Bureau of Land Management, is that Interior, and been like, hey, what's going on with that permit? Like, are you guys working on it? Can you guys hurry it up? Right? Like, but again, I don't really understand what the point of that was. But it seems to be what mining executives do. Because there was a whole bunch of mining executives that went to that meeting to just be like, hey, we like this stuff. Some of you may be familiar. This was a little bit before my time. So this is what my predecessor told me the story about what happened. Although I had a pretty similar experience. But anyways, this is what, 2018, 2019. A number of folk who may have some connections to the department, because I know Colorado was a big part of it, argue for restricting imports of uranium in order to boost the domestic uranium industry. And this is where I'll say, like, you got to have your arguments in order, right? Like, I wasn't at this meeting, but from what my colleague who preceded me, this was a total, like, the arguments for this were just like, we like mining in the US. So restrict imports of uranium, right? And then CEA came in and was like, we import this much. This is the size of the domestic industry. There's like, nuclear plants are screwed if you do this, right? Like, prices are just going to go way up. And the rest of the White House was like, yeah, totally, right? This is a stupid idea. We shouldn't do this. And there ended up being no restrictions on imports of uranium. And I will say, you know, if you're thinking of, in some of these scenarios, what you're going to find is folk like me who, well, will say, I'm going to use free market in quotes because, right, everybody likes to tilt the table towards their friends. But generally, right, like we don't like trade restrictions, right? CEA spent most of its life under the Trump administration fighting the trade restrictions. So we like general free market principles. But generally, right, we go to a meeting, we know Treasury's on our side. We know Treasury's a bunch of other economists, and they're probably going to be there saying, yeah, any trade restriction is not a good idea. This doesn't make a bunch of sense. And so, you know, in this case, my understanding of the uranium-232 decision kind of came down to a couple politicos in the room, and CEA and Treasury kind of making this argument like, this is stupid. We're going to really hurt our, you know, nuclear power plants because they don't have to buy way more expensive uranium. And the other side going like, domestic stuff is good. And the politicos going, yeah, okay, never, yeah, screw this, right? We're not doing this. And so, you know, that's what ended up happening. The thing that I was on is, and this was really weird. This was like November of 2020. So we'll say, if I want to use, if it's, let's say Trump lost, but maybe not. Like, maybe in November you weren't sure, right? But anyways, this was after the election. We get this email that's, hey, National Security Council wants to start, you know, either putting import tariffs or import quotas on minerals from for batteries, for EVs. So, you know, this is our plan. So, like, oh, okay, and right, and so this, to be quite frank, this email goes around, and the meeting's going to be in 4 days. 3 days later, somebody's like, Ian, don't you know about minerals? You know, and sends me this email. I'm like, yeah, I know about minerals, and this is a terrible idea. So I spent like 2 hours writing a response to this, like why we need to put import taxes on battery materials, or why we need to have import quotas on battery materials. I would say, I mean, and to be frank, I don't, you know, I would say I'm a modest guy. This is an I. Like I wrote that thing in 2 hours. The rest of the CEA took it and was like, all right, Ian says, right? And Treasury goes, yeah, this is a stupid idea, right? And like basically the discussion stops, right? Security Council is like, okay, I guess that was a bad idea to try to think about putting import restrictions on battery minerals. And so, so again, I mean, I think if we're thinking about ways to like boost domestic industry, and it might be, it's obviously a little different under the Biden administration, but I mean, there needs to be some sort of cohesive arguments that, you know, either can refute what we'll say like the free market people like me are going to say, or, you know, that can sort of hold up to some water, hold up to what else is going on in the industry. So it said, this mirrored sort of what my colleague told me happened in the uranium-232 meetings, where it's basically sort of a random haphazard, like, I don't know, like I don't know what the other side was thinking, right? I'm guessing this was just Navarro's group with some last hurrahs trying to, bash China. And then again, but smart, I don't want to say, smarter people were like, wait, this doesn't make any sense, right? And so, and if it was, if Trump had won, maybe that would have been harder to stop. But again, it sort of hit, sort of an easy end. Like that first meeting, CEA argued back, Treasury was like, yeah, these people know what they're talking about. And then we never had another meeting again. The other thing that was weird about that point was like they had just put in this rule, right, to reduce the corporate average fuel economy for cars. And I was like, okay, so first you're going to tell me that, it's that there's less damages, we'll say, from driving an internal combustion car around. And then you're going to tell me that battery minerals are super important because of EVs. Like, guys, think about what you're doing here, right? Again, there was like these arguments just didn't make any sense, right? Like, how could you put forward one, we'll say like pro internal combustion engine policy, and then also say EVs are crucial. These are, we need to protect our industry because these are crucial technologies. It's like, no, you just found against them and you just found for the substitutes. It makes no sense. So anyways, this is some experiences within the Trump administration around mining. I mean, the other thing, just to be quite clear, right? There was this October executive order in support of mining, signed it in Minnesota when he was campaigning in Minnesota. Again, like that was a total political BS executive order. Like nothing ever came across our desk. It must have been written in like a day as a way to try to win Minnesota. So then, of course, I have like 2 months where we COVID hit in Maine. Wow. Over the winter, so I have 2 months in Maine, of course, like December, January, Maine, not very bright times. And then you have like the January 6th stuff, and again, I have like basically zero work coming from the Trump administration. And then January 21st rolls around, first day of the Biden administration, and it's like, let's get to work. And I was all excited, like, great, yes, let's get to work. What are you guys interested in? I'm excited to see the beginning of an administration. Because most administrations, the beginning, people jump in because they're excited, like we just won, we're going to do all these things, right? And then like 2 years later, you're usually like, yeah, politics sucks, right? Like this, we lost in the midterms, so I joined the Trump administration in the last year, was excited for this like first little bit of the Biden administration, and so I don't know what the word is. I would say they seem to be saying politically the right things. But to be frank, I'm not, I think I'm not optimistic. I don't want to say it's bullshit, but there's nothing going on. I have friends who joined the review process that's going on right now. I don't have any hope for anything real to come out of that. Right, and some of you know the gentleman at USGS who was an OSTP for their critical minerals work. Again, I'm not sure what happened there, not as far as I can tell, nothing ever came across my desk. That's what was going on. So I don't really have any hope. If you read the 100-day review, right, they kind of repeat a bunch of previous talking points, like we're going to get DOE and Interior and EPA together, and we're going to see if there's any mines that you might be able to mine. And it's like, whoa, you don't have to get these people together. We know where these places are. It's not like they're hiding under rocks. Like, hey, where's that lithium? I lost it, right? Like, come on, guys, this is bull, right? So, and I'll say my interactions with Falcon, I would bet is going on in the Biden administration is you got two camps, right? You got the people that are like, don't turn over anything. And you got the people that are like, we need jobs in the US. So the only place I can kind of agree is why don't we just recycle minerals, right? So every time I try to say, Biden administration, right, you guys are excited about domestic jobs, you want to improve domestic resilience of the supply chain, let's talk DEPA, let's talk, permitting, let's talk getting some of these mines open in the US. Every answer I got was, hey, why don't we just recycle? And I'd say like, yeah, you don't want a mine in your backyard, but you want something in your backyard where you're throwing chemicals on, and you're doing things to separate out the different minerals, like, sure, whatever, right? So I interpreted this as like, I need a 20-second answer. Like when someone pushes, I need to push back, but I can't, but I don't need, like, I don't have anything else beyond that, right? like, I just need a pushback because then I'm leaving. Right, and so this was their pushback, right? Why don't we just recycle? So, okay, fine, it's gonna be recycling is the thing they're gonna push. I will say also, like, the folk that are in the White House, obviously pro clean energy. I don't think they have much knowledge of upstream issues. I think they think a lot about solar panels and wind turbines, and they don't think a lot about much else going on there. And again, I don't want to, like I said, friends of mine are undertaking this year-long review at DOE or other parts, right? Like, and I've talked to them and I've said, look, this is probably, you're probably going to waste your time. Like, you're probably going to spend a year and you're going to write up something that's going to be the same shit that people wrote in 2018. But anyways, I hope not, right? So try, see if you can do something. And one of the reasons why this isn't going to do anything, the executive branch can't do things on its own, right? Like, look at right? So this is something executive branch tried to do. What happened? As soon as it passed, it got sued, right? This is a Trump thing, right? It's got Trump's name on it. So guess what Biden wants to do? Reverse it. Not, we're not going to think about it. It's Trump's thing, so we're just going to reverse it, right? And so they've already started the process of reversing whatever happened there, right? No discussion of, hey, maybe there's something good in there. So I don't know. Like, I'm not optimistic about what's going to come out of this next supply review. If you want a point of optimism, so Biden loves EVs. I heard my boss say many times that Biden wants to win EVs. And one of the ways they want to win EVs is basically downstream, right? So you want the cars produced in the US. And they've had some successes so far, right? Ford, Toyota, GM, all announcing big investments in EV production in the US, right? I would say importantly for folk in the room here, Ford said we need some mining in the US because essentially the mining folk don't get much traction in the Biden administration. Maybe Ford saying this will get someone to listen. Again, I'm not optimistic. This is sort of like mining is to the Democrats what people was to the Republicans. It splits them. And basically what that means is nobody's going to want to really do anything because it splits them, right? You're going to piss off some of your friends. I will say, if you guys are going to follow this news, I like the Reuters group. I think Reuters knows what they're doing, but they basically just wrote a hit piece in June where they got somebody in the White House off record to say, we're going to expect to get our critical minerals from foreign sources. Then they got someone on record to say what exactly you'd expect a Politico to say. We're looking at all options in order to source our critical minerals, right? So I wouldn't put much weight on that Reuters piece, if you remember that from June or so. That's how the White House works, right? This political infighting. So somebody who was anti-mining, talked off the record to Reuters to get that story out there to say, oh, they want to take mining minerals from somewhere else, our allies like Canada and Australia. So again, and the other reason, besides the fact that my boss told me Biden said they want to win EVs, look at that 100-day review. What they discussed in there, it's all downstream EVs. The only thing that's new, what they talked about, is how they're going to support downstream EVs. Downstream meaning putting the cars together. I don't know, they think that's a lot more jobs. They think that's in politically sensitive places like Ohio and Michigan. Although, of course, this is why I can't believe this, right? Like, where's Ford building all their EVs? The Democratic place of Tennessee, right? Like, what the frick does Tennessee care about EVs? They're about to get a whole bunch of people who are going to be employed building EVs. So anyways, this is where I guess mining might be able to make some traction is if you get friends in the auto industry to say, look, our life's a lot harder when I have to worry about where are these minerals coming from. If we could have some domestic sources, that would make our life easier. If somebody says that, and it gets to the right person, perhaps something can happen. But that's my only point of optimism, for lack of a better word. So I know I try to tell some fun stories. I got other fun stories if you want to hear some. But are there any questions on the topic of mining or COVID or, what was Trump doing in early January? Yeah, Steve.
Not to do with mining, but to do with pitching. why on earth make the thing that, why make ask the last thing? What's the logic? It makes no sense to me to waste all your time and then
Right.
miss the opportunity to really talk about the key thing. It's not how anyone would do it in industry.
Hope they remember they'll remember the last thing you said, I think is the logic. That when you do a pitch with a politician, the ask goes last, because that's what they'll remember.
And you have to have then the first part of your meeting needs it 1 minute long. and
Exactly.
The ask has to be 29 minutes.
Or the ask has, yeah, or, let's just give me a 30-second meeting, right? Like, here's my ask, I'm out of here, right? Because, yeah, what are you doing with the other time? Just wasting time in some sense. Wasting
So
everyone's
it's,
time.
wow,
So,
small minds.
like I said, this is just, I've heard this was the theory, right? The theory is you put your ask at the end whenever you're talking to a politician. So when I left that meeting, I was like, well, they did the theory, but it was still a waste, I think. So Nicole, potentially, right? So withholding release orders can only come into place around human rights abuses. So what you need is some fairly good evidence and political will to go after the folk who, who might be benefiting from that, right? So in some sense, it's not surprising that, for those, if you can't read this, Nicole asked whether we can use withholding release orders for contract minerals or illegal gold. And again, legally, the withholding release orders are only allowed for things like human rights abuses. It's a very narrow band in which the, what's it called? Customs Immigration or has the right to seize products that are imported. And then, of course, like I said, politics, right? So, do we have a reason to go after the DRC? Is the DRC big enough or an issue that we'll say the Biden administration wants to expend some political capital? If so, then that could happen. If not, like I said, I doubt they would, for lack of a better word. So again, you need to have some, political reason for this. And like I said, when it was Xinjiang and the Uyghurs, it was China, so it was easy, right? It's easy to say we got to do something about China, and we pick these couple things that we can easily hit because there's good story or there's a good argument as to why you put withholding release orders on the tomatoes, the cotton, and the polysilicon from Xinjiang.
Gotcha. Thanks, Ian.
All right, yeah. Oh, something just come up? Yeah. Well, again, I don't necessarily say politics makes strange bedfellows, right? But to the extent that a downstream industry has either a better political relationship or a stronger political relationship, there's value there, right? And we've yet to see whether that's changed people's opinions, the fact that Ford called this out. But I would say, that is better than anything else a mining company could have done. How's that? There's nothing else a mining company could have done to get as much attention as Ford saying it politically. So, to the extent, yes, that, the downstream industries realize and understand and believe that, this tighter supply chain is important, or this tighter supply chain helps encourage, their growth, then yeah, right, cultivating that relationships and having them argue for that would be an important thing. You can see it in, we certainly I wrote about 3 memos on rare earths when I was at CEA, actually not all of them for the Trump administration, right? But if you looked at the numbers of what some of this is, this is pennies, right? This is from a federal government standpoint, the investment needed are nothing. From the DoD's budget, it's nothing, right? So when we started looking into this, and we're just like, God, we've spent more money talking about rare earths in the Trump administration than it would frickin' cost to build something, right? It was like you had a whole bunch of meetings, you had a bunch of people get together, right? You had whatever, NSC, DOE, right? Like 15 reports. Like this has been, what are we doing, right? Like when we started looking into that and obviously made arguments within the White House that, right, really what you just need is, somebody to help open up a refining or a processing facility in the US. That's really where the strength of the Chinese monopoly is, and you can help, sort of stop that cycle of everybody sending contracts with the Chinese. But yeah, I mean, there's limited stuff that the executive branch can do. And so, I mean, kind of to Elizabeth's question, I was a little bit surprised, like, man, DOD could solve this like that, right? The amount of money DOD would have to pay, Department of Defense have to pay to help break this, rare earth issue is rounding error in their budget. Like their budget every year, that amount of money is rounding error. Like no one would even notice it's gone in some sense, right? If they were just like, hey, rare element earth or rare earth elements, wherever the one is, down the street with their mine up in Wyoming, or the one down in Texas was that USA rare earth. Like if they just had funneled some money to them and been like, just build the thing so that we don't have to deal with this issue anymore. No one would have even noticed, right? Like their budget is so huge, it would have been like, would have rounding error.
So Ian,
Yeah.
you, I don't blame you for being negative in terms of your outlook on how it's really going to work. But what do you think the biggest real opportunity is now?
Recycling.
You think so?
I mean, you'll get Democrats, backing you
But the
up.
problem is it doesn't solve, it's only a small part of the whole deal.
Right.
I mean,
And I don't know if part of it is you start there and you're left like, see, we don't have horns. Like, hey, let's open up this, let's do that or something like that. But I mean, there's still, and this isn't, I would say, to be fair, I would say sort of like, I see NIMBY and bananas everywhere because I feel like every industry that is people are interested in or excited about, right? It's like, oh, we just can't build it, right? So you hear, or maybe on Twitter at least, or my energy Twitter feed is all about building more transmission. Yep. Guess who stopped building more transmission? Every homeowner is like, I don't want to look at that, right? So all permitting for transmission is impossible, right? No different than a mine, right? Permitting for transmission is possible. Permitting for wind turbines, right? So things like that, they're just possible. So again, like it's not unique to mining, right?
yeah, right.
And so I've heard these stories, which I don't really believe, that, like, oh, well, when we survey people in Washington, D.C., like they have a negative view of mining. But when I survey people outside of Washington, D.C., they have a positive view of mining. I'm sort of like, okay, that doesn't mean it. Like the people who live in Washington, D.C., they don't all come from Washington, D.C., right? They come from somewhere else. They move there to work or, to be part of federal government. They talk to people, right? I mean, they're freaking politicians, right? Like they know what they're doing. I mean, to be fair, right? If there's one thing a politician knows, it's what its constituents are thinking. Because if you don't know that, you're gone, right? So this idea that like somehow it's only these like power brokers in DC that are fighting this, if there was a demand from all the constituents of the senators and the House, it would happen, right? Like, I don't know what to tell you, right? Like, it's just not that, it's not that simple that DC hates mining and the 40 or the 50 other states love it. And it's those jerks in DC. But it's the same for everybody, right? Transmission planning, yeah. When, building new roads, whatever, building anything, right? That's where, again, the bananas and the NIMBYism comes in. Yeah, exactly. I hope that, are they going to get the permits to build their processing facility? I think, to be quite fair, oops, that moved out of the way, the Corby thing. To be quite fair, I think this is the only thing that basically people do is like, oh, R&D, I'll throw some money at R&D. And I don't know where you guys stand. I think it's done zip, right? Every Appalachian DOE report is like, and we're looking at rare earths from coal. Like, yeah, the last 5 or 6 years, guess what? People are still losing their jobs. They're not happy. They're, again, R&D is a super easy thing to sell politically. Throw money at your constituents. Hey, great idea, right? I don't know. I've yet to see where it's done anything here. Yeah, again, that's not in the White House. So that could be the case. They might find that when they hit to it, but not in the White House. Again, that's their response to, and maybe it's like, you got to call them on it. Like, Okay, here's a couple of recycling facilities ready to go. But yeah, I would say, Corby, this was my response when somebody would tell me, oh yeah, recycling, right? It's like, seriously, you guys don't want, you don't want a power line near you, you don't want a mine near you, you don't want a wind turbine near you, but you want a metal recycling facility near you? This doesn't make any sense, guys, right? So these arguments don't make any sense, right? I feel like, and maybe I'm just, again, like, you could just call the Democrats on it. Like, you said recycling, here you go. Not sure if that's a winning strategy, but yeah. How am I doing on time? All right. Okay, well, if you can, I will say one of my favorite stories, if you don't mind a COVID story, since we got 2 more minutes. So like April 2020, we're all still in the building trying to do things around COVID. So my team is basically tasked with, well, Trump put in that restriction on Chinese visitors, right, in February. This is now April. So that's a good thing, right? So figure out how many infections were saved by not letting the Chinese in, from February 2nd on. So we spent about a month doing that. We had different models of how infections grow and things like that. So we spent probably 2 or 3 weeks getting the numbers that we thought we could easily stand behind. And it was probably something like, 15,000 saved deaths, like and I don't remember how many infections, right? We had a guess at the infection fatality rate. So we took, got the number of infections, brought back to the number of deaths. And when you're in the White House, basically, if anybody wants to write something that goes public, it goes to what's called the staff secretary. Staff sec gets sent to all of the cabinet members, and they get to comment. And CDC comes back with this number is total BS because we were at the airports and we would have stopped anybody with COVID from entering the US. And I was like, you guys got how far up your own, right, are you? Like that this is the argument you're gonna make, that you would have stopped COVID at the airport if there wasn't this Chinese ban? What were you doing? You had no tests, right? Where you could take people's temperature, and that's how you're stopping it? Like, we know that's pretty uncorrelated. So we spent like a week fighting CDC, saying that our numbers, are solid. CDC thinks the numbers should be 0 because they would have found them at the airport if we were still letting Chinese folk to enter. So when it's a tie like that, it goes to the agency that wrote something, right? So when one agency says no, the one that wrote it says this is good, it goes to the one that wrote it. So I got told we were like within a half hour of releasing it, and then somebody realized that our number was like 10,000 deaths saved, and Trump had already said 1 million deaths saved. And they couldn't put out something that was so off from what Trump said. So they were like, we're pulling this. And I was like, oh, that's a month of work, right? Like, seriously, like 10 hours a day, month of work just writing that. Like, okay, like Trump had already said something way stupider, so our numbers can't get out. But anyway, so that's the White House. Right. Corby, I will push back with you. I don't believe so. Politicians know their constituents very well. I think there's a lot of NIMBYism. There's a lot of bananas around. To be fair, like, and I get these all the time, right? Like people writing me saying, oh, hey, the state of Maine has the most strict mining laws in all of the US. Now I'm like, yes, every state thinks they have the most strict mining laws in all of the US, right? Like people do not want things near them. And they don't want anything near them. The bananas is the build absolutely nothing. What is it? Absolutely everywhere or nowhere or something like that. So I think that's the bigger fight in some sense. It's not that there's not technical people. There's lots of technical people, lots of smart people who are trying to make arguments. But politically, they don't win the day. And they don't win the day because generally, right, people are, I don't want to say scared of change, but their constituents are not excited about a story of like, hey, we're going to put a mine right there. People are more like, geez, in 1890, that was, that screwed up a bunch of stuff. Like, this is 2020 or 2021. So The 1890 mine was bad, so the 2020 mine must also be bad. That's where I'm at on this topic. You want me to? I think I'll stop with the storytelling there.
So thank you, everyone. Just wanted to remind you, thank you, Professor,
Yeah.
for this nice talk. Thank you all for coming today. Just want to remind you that we have this seminar every week, same time. Next week, it will be about artificial intelligence in mine safety. So I think this is another interesting topic. It will be in person as well by Professor Shabnam Dusgun. So thank you very much and have a nice day. Thank you for people who are online.